back at it again, and this is going to be a really interesting video. It's a little bit different. Today I got a private class with Elliot from Open Mat MMA, and he is a third degree black belt and the owner slash operator of Open Mat. So this was just a one-on-one class to help me develop my game plan for January when I'm going to be competing. So the first thing we did was, Elliot said to me, well, what do you feel are your strengths and your kind of go-to moves when you're rolling with people? And so we basically just had a look at what I was doing at the moment and what I was finding was working for me. And then he went over a couple more bits and pieces to really improve what I'm doing and sort of iron out some of the issues with what I'm doing. So one of the first things that he pointed out that I was doing that was incorrect was when I was starting the round, I wasn't kind of protecting my grips. I wasn't having my hands in the way of my lapel, making it difficult for my opponent to not establish any of the grips that they might want. So the first thing that we did was we kind of played around at sort of the first stage of grip fighting, which is why you saw us kind of moving our hands around there, and then straight into a takedown, which is where you put that foot behind the knee, grab both the legs, and from there there's a couple of options. So one of the first things we decided to explore was the straight ankle lock, which he said to me in his experience is probably the most high percentage quick finish in the white belt competitions. So that involves just taking the ankle, putting it to the side, kind of wrapping it in my arm, and sort of doing a crank on the ankle, and that's the straight ankle lock. So the first thing we did was we explored kind of ways to get to the straight ankle lock, high percentage ways that are going to be simple to kind of get a mastery of, and maybe that would be what I try to pull off in a competition. And something that I think I've explained before in previous videos is that I'm not super comfortable with takedowns. I don't have a lot of takedowns in my arsenal, and when I do shoot for a takedown, particularly takedowns like the single leg, sort of more of the advanced movements, I really struggle to get those. And so one of the things we really focused on today was which takedowns would work for me, and we did have a go at doing a couple of different takedowns. But this one you see here, Elliot's just explaining to me that if I can have my leg locked on the hip and really, really tight, I can go into a high guard, a high closed guard, and the higher that guard is on my opponent, the higher up their back that guard is, the more of their body I'm shutting down and the more in control I am. And from there, we're going to either go into that sweep you just saw there, or he was going to show me how to go to the back from there. And so those two things, either going to the back or doing that sweep, they're kind of opposite directions that you can take depending on what your opponent does once you have them in your closed guard. So the first thing that he showed me how to do was getting the opponent into the closed guard, and then from there deciding which route to take, either to the back or to the to the sweep, I should say. And so yeah, those are the two pathways. So the first thing we basically worked on was getting the opponent into that guard and kind of really making that it's not really a takedown, it's kind of pulling guard, but making that guard pull as strong as it can be and as effective as it can be. So one of the things that I wasn't doing in the first place was I wasn't actually putting my foot on the hip straight away. I was coming down first, which is the wrong order of operations. The first thing I need to do is I need to get that foot on the hip and really put a lot of strength into that leg, tighten everything up, pull my arms, push my foot, and really sort of immobilize my partner by doing that. And by doing so and breaking the posture all the way down, I'm able to get very, very high in the closed guard position. And so this is Elliot just explaining that if I don't put my foot up first, it's quite easy to pass the guard when I pull down. So the first and most important thing with this guard pull is getting that foot onto the hip first, pushing that leg straight so that there's no movement that my opponent has left, and then getting my other leg really high up, getting my hips really high up, and closing the guard as high as possible on my opponent's body, and effectively shutting down the most of their body as possible, just so that I'm having the maximum control. But something that I was forgetting, that Elliot kept pointing out to me, was that when I start the roll with someone, when I start the bout with someone, the first thing I need to be conscious of is not allowing them to get grips. The first thing, that's the first stage of the round is establishing grips, and I don't want them to establish some grips on me that are going to make it difficult for me to go into my attacks. So it's very important for me to be conscious at the start of the roll who gets the grips, and hopefully I'm the one getting the grips and I can start pulling guard or going into one of the takedowns that we talk about a little bit later. So basically what Elliot's explaining to me here is that it's really important for me to keep my hips off the ground when I shoot through, to get my legs as high as possible. Because, and you've probably seen this if you've been watching my other videos, I have this bad habit of closing my guard really low down the body. And I think that that is a consequence of me not being very flexible in the hips, not being very strong in the hips or strong in the abs. So I do get tired in my abs and find it difficult to pull my knees into my chest, because that requires, ab muscles, hip flexibility, and all of that kind of thing. And so once the closed guard has been established and I have my legs high up my opponent, Elliot is now showing me the next stage, which is either to do a sort of hip bump sweep forward, or pull the arm in and start going to taking the back. And like I said a little bit earlier, these are two opposite pathways depending on what the opponent does. So if I'm trying to pull the arm of the opponent that is in my guard, and I pull it to the side and they resist and pull it back and posture up, then it's time for me to change what I'm trying to do. I'm not going to try to take the back anymore. I'm now going to sweep them, because they're basically helping me sweep them by pulling their arm back. And so really what you're offering your opponent when you're doing this from the closed guard is you're offering them either, I'm going to take your back if you let me take this arm, or if you take the arm back, I'm going to sweep you. And it's basically just giving your opponent a problem here, but either way, no matter what they choose, you're going to be in a more effective position. And so what Elliot's showing me here is, if they do let me take the arm and they don't posture up, and I am able to get the arm all the way across their body, then I can start transitioning into the back. Otherwise, that sweep you just saw right then, that's the sweep I'm going to do if they try to take the arm back. And so the next sort of part of this private was us just drilling the different options that happen there based on what happens with the opponent. So you can see that Elliot let me take that arm across his body, which means for me now I have to take my other arm over and grab inside of the armpit and start transitioning to the back. So that's the first possibility. But what he said was, it's really important for me to hug that hand in the armpit so that he can't turn around, he can't establish control of the arm that I took in the start of the system. And so one of the most important parts of this system here is keeping control with that hand in the armpit, so I can start swiveling over, get that foot in, and now I'm well and truly on the back, and I can start attacking the back. So something as well that was kind of confusing me was that he was saying that I have to hide the strangling hand that I'm going to use to strangle him, so that he can't, with his hand, immobilize my strangling hand and start shutting down this system. But I was having a problem sort of remembering which one was my strangling hand, so it took a couple goes to get that fluid and make sure that I was doing that correctly. But once you're on the back, if the opponent takes the strangling hand and kind of holds that away from the strangle, then it's going to be more of not a grip fight, but it's going to be kind of a fight to see who has control of the strangling hand. But if I just put my other hand over the top, the opponent has to take the shielding hand away from the strangling hand first, and by the time they do that, they don't have any hands left to attack my strangling hand, but pretty much. So the most important thing to do once I'm on the back here is to protect my strangling hand with the shielding hand, which becomes the passing hand of the lapel. So the shielding hand grabs the lapel, straightens it out, makes it really stiff, so that the other hand, the strangling hand, can grab it and start initiating the strangle. So that's basically what he's saying here. The first hand, the shielding hand, pulls down the lapel, makes it nice and tight, passes it over to the strangling hand, and then I can start getting up on my elbow, already start pulling that back, and then the passing hand grabs the other lapel, and I'm well and truly in the choke now, and that should be able to give me the tap. So quite a few little nuances there, quite a few little things that are all really important to have an effective back take, have an effective strangle once the back is taken, if the opponent knows to start attacking that the strangling hand. So I definitely need to have that shielding hand in place and make sure I remember which hand is which. But you can see here I'm kind of still figuring out which hand is which in the system because it is pretty new to me. And I have had problems in the past once I have taken the back, finishing from the back, and particularly in no gi, but also in the gi, kind of locking up that strangle from the back. And I think the reason that I've had trouble locking up that strangle from the back is because I didn't understand the concept of the passing hand and the strangling hand. And something Elliot told me was extremely important is that one hand has to be the passing hand, and that hand has to straighten out the lapel first. Otherwise, it's way too weak. You're not going to be able to get that strangling pressure, and you're probably not going to be able to finish the choke anywhere near as easily as if you'd had that passing hand straighten out the lapel, get rid of all the slack inside the lapel. And that is probably is just one of those things with jiu-jitsu where you really have to fight for position, and then you have the opportunity for the submission, and not the other way around. The passing hand thing seems to me like one of those things where you're waiting until everything is completely in place before you're doing the submission. And I've noticed that when rolling with higher belts or just watching higher belts roll with each other and do competitions and things like that, is that they spend a lot more time than the lower belts setting up their body to be in position before they start cranking the submission, And so a good example of that would be arm bars. I've had not that much luck hitting people with arm bars, and I think one of the reasons that I've struggled with arm bars is because I don't set myself up in the perfect position on their body first before I attack the submission. I'm too hasty to attack the submission. And so you can see here, now that I'm on the back and I straightened out that lapel before passing it to the strangling hand, I have a much stronger strangle on Elliot than I would have if I'd just grabbed the lapel with the strangling hand and try to kind of wrap it around his neck as much as possible. I don't think that would have been anywhere near as strong of a strangle as if I'd used the passing hand. So once we worked through that a couple of times, what Elliot did was he asked me how I was getting that arm from in the closed guard, and how I was breaking it from the lapel, because the opponent is probably going to grab the lapel. And he showed me that kind of Kimura style grip, and he said that is going to be a bit stronger than the two-handed grip that I've been using in the past. And so I tried to do it with the Kimura grip, and it definitely felt a lot stronger. And another thing that he said was going to really help me to get that arm was to hip bump and throw the partner on top of my body a little bit more, so that the weight was kind of off the arm and I could pull it off the lapel. And so it's hip bump and then break the grip. And that seemed really effective to me, and it also felt like it came pretty naturally as a sequence of movements. So I definitely think I'll be using that Kimura style grip now rather than the two-handed grip, which, in my experience rolling with people, especially stronger opponents, the two-handed grip that I've been using hasn't been 100% effective on some of the much bigger, much stronger opponents. So the Kimura grip, I think I'll definitely be using that Kimura grip from now on. And I'll just say as well, like it's kind of amazing the depth of knowledge that some people have on jiu-jitsu. And I'll be doing something where I think, this is pretty much the best way to do this particular movement. And then Elliot will come along and say, well, why don't you just move your hand a little bit that way, or change your grip slightly this way? And it really is remarkable just how much knowledge in jiu-jitsu Elliot has, and just how much this private helped and gave me some different little nuances, little adjustments that have made have made my movements a lot more effective, and these submissions a lot more effective. So very grateful to be able to have had this private, and I definitely think it's going to be very helpful to me when I do a competition to have a system that I know I can call upon, and I know that I can take all the way to the end, and that I'm very familiar with, and also familiar with some of the defenses, and able to take a different pathway, like doing that sweep you just saw there, if my partner does something to defend the first move. And so until today, really what I would have in my mind is, one set of moves that I'm going to try, and if it doesn't work, then I'll try something else completely different. It's not like this system I'm learning here where I can get halfway through and anticipate a defense and know exactly what to do as a response to that defense, and move into a completely new pathway within that system and still get further down the line and eventually to a submission. And so this is the first time I've ever really had a system like that where I can answer some of the responses from my opponent that would be the correct defenses to do by my opponent. So very exciting. And I'm also booking in another private lesson with Elliot early this coming week. And so I'll be able to refine my game plan even more than I have so far. And so a good example of how Elliot has given me some information that's really helping my submissions is the Americana submission, which felt to me like, you know, it was my strongest submission. It was the one I always went for. I felt like I had it pretty much down, had it, you know, really pretty much perfect. But he explained to me a few things that made it even better. So for example, if you put your hands in front of your body, you know, straight arm, straight wrist in front of your body, and then you curl your wrists forward to make them sort of look like T-Rex arms. He explained to me that if I do that kind of curling forwards of the wrist, once I have the Kimura in place, then the Kimura is going to be so much stronger. I should say Americana. It's not really a Kimura, it's more of an Americana. But he was explaining to me that if my wrists are tilted forwards, then I'm going to have so much more strength in the Americana, and it's going to be so much easier for me to finish against opponents that have, you know, a really strong arm and that might be fighting to get their arm out of the Americana position into more of a straight position. If I'm able to curl my wrists forwards and curl my hands forwards, it's going to be a lot stronger of a position for me, and it's going to be a lot more difficult for my opponent to straighten that arm out. So just little nuances like that, little adjustments like that have been really helpful for me and have really improved, I think, my ability to, you know, get to these positions and get to the submissions. But I found it really impressive just how much knowledge someone can have, and just how easily they can pick out very small but very significant problems and improvements in these techniques. So another one that was very interesting to me was once I was on top of the back and Elliot was in not really a turtle position, but on his hands and knees on the top. He explained to me that if I use my heel to push his foot out of the way, that will kind of sweep him over into that choking position that you saw just then. Instead of, you know, trying to use my strength or my weight to pull him over, I could do something as simple as pushing his ankle with my ankle, which would cause his whole body to, you know, flip over into the position that I want to be in. And that seems to me like one of the core tenets of jiu-jitsu, which is you don't have to use your strength to get to new positions, to force your partner into different positions. When you have all these interesting and different ways to leverage your partner's body and get them into the position that way. And so that kind of reminded me of that idea. If I just push the ankle with my ankle, it can be just as effective as if I use all of my strength to pull his body on top of me. And it's obvious which one is the better option. You know, when you're fighting in jiu-jitsu, you have a finite amount of energy. You don't want to waste all of your energy, and you don't want to waste energy on stuff you don't need to use your energy on. And so, yeah, that seemed to me like the perfect example of that. So once we drilled that sweep, the double ankle sweep, Elliot explained to me that I should be doing the Hickson stand-up into that sweep before I make my next move. And you can see here that the Hickson stand-up is a little bit awkward for me. And I think that is possibly because I'm putting my planting foot too close to my body, or maybe I just lack the core strength or flexibility to get it right. But we drilled it a few times, and by the end of doing it, I was a little bit better. So you'll see that I kind of got it towards the end, but it definitely doesn't feel as natural to me as it looks for Elliot. But I gave it a couple more goes, and by the end, I think if I keep my torso close to my legs, close to my knees, it's a little bit easier for me to get it from there. And he also explained to me that once I've done the sweep, I can use that inertia and that momentum from my partner to kind of pull me up into the Hickson stand-up. I don't just need to use my whole body and try to leverage myself up like that. See, he's grabbing the ankles, and he was just explaining to me that if I was grabbing the ankles or grabbing the knees, I could just pull myself up into that combat stance. I think is what he said it was called, the combat stance. And from there, start going into all different kinds of attacks. So you can see that we've drilled a few different kind of takedowns, pulling guard, a few different submissions, a few different positions. And really what we're exploring here is just all the different, not all the different, but like a lot of the different permutations of what might happen in a competition and what I might do to, you know, answer some of the problems that my partner might give me in a competition, you know, or my opponent, I should say. So the straight ankle lock, he said, was probably the most high percentage submission in his experience from his white belts in competition. And also, I think like white belts don't really expect to be leg locked that much, because in a lot of gyms, they don't teach you leg locks at white belt. You're not allowed to do a lot of the leg locks in competition. So I think, and also like being a white belt, you have massive gaps in your knowledge as well. So there's going to be gaps in the knowledge. So that might be something I go for in the competition, if it feels right in the moment. If I can get that takedown with both the ankles, I'll be in a really good position to just do a straight ankle lock. And the cool thing about the ankle lock as well is once I lock it up with my legs, it is actually very difficult to get out of. And so I'm going to be definitely drilling that leg lock for the next couple of months as the competition gets closer. So another thing that Elliot showed me, which was full of nuance and adjustment compared to what I was doing before, was going from side control into mount without letting my knee get too high and allowing them to block it. So what he was saying was that I should kind of crawl my leg over and flex my foot until my knee gets over their body, and then push their legs down rather than trying to go over their legs. You know, it's keeping more contact on their body, and going sort of from side control to a sort of knee on belly intermediary position, and then getting my knee over their torso and pushing their legs down with my knee. And you know, the more I can push their legs down with my knee, the more into the mount position I am, and the less space I've given them to kind of defend that. And once I'm in there, Elliot offered another adjustment to me, which was to get my hips really low, pull my knees off the mat, and that's a lot of pressure, and a lot of people would, you know, tap just to that pressure because it's so much pressure on the diaphragm. It's a very uncomfortable position for the person on bottom. And as somebody who has quite a bit of weight behind him, I'm quite a big person, it works to my advantage to have as much pressure on my opponent as possible. So he's basically explaining to me, like, you know, why wouldn't you use that pressure? If you got the weight, you might as well use it. So that's something that I was using. This class, I had one more class after this the next day, and I was definitely using that mount pressure in the no-gi. And I did manage to tap someone just to pressure by putting all my weight on them like that, pushing my hips down, pulling my knees off the air. And you know, like that is so much weight on the diaphragm that if you're underneath someone and they're doing that to you, it can be really difficult to breathe. And so some of the white belts, and myself included, have tapped, you know, to that kind of pressure before, and like that seems to me like a pretty nice technique, just to really exhaust your opponent. If your opponent has, you know, more athleticism, more fitness than you, maybe this is a way to kind of take the wind out of them and exhaust them. So I think I'll definitely be using this technique in the future as well. And I'll just say as well, like, holding somebody in mount, I've always struggled with, because I think one of the first things you learn in jiu-jitsu is the mount escape, like the elbow escape and the hip escape. And I've definitely noticed that people who are significantly smaller than me, significantly less strong than me, have been able to escape my mount. So there must be some, you know, fundamental issues with my mount. And I think one of those fundamental issues was that I was keeping my knees too wide because I was always worried about getting swept. I was always worried about having a base. But if I can just keep my feet underneath them and put all my weight on them like that and use my arms to base, then I'll be in an advantageous position because they won't necessarily be able to sweep me any more easily than if I had a wide knee base. So that's something for me to think about as well, while being in the mounted position. But after that, Elliot asked me what other takedowns that I was familiar with and that I would be likely to use. And so I did that sort of ankle pick, but we agreed that probably wouldn't be a wise idea in a competition setting, and that there are probably better options. So what he showed me was this kind of, I can't remember what he called it, but it was like a sideways throw where you step to the side, you have that lapel grip, that cross lapel grip, and then you just pull them down. And either you can take them all the way down doing this, like, you know, you can do the full takedown like that, but if they don't drop to their knees or they don't drop onto the mat, you can grab the leg and then turn it into a kind of single leg wrestling move and drive with your head and get them down that way. And so, yeah, sometimes you'll get them all the way down like that, but sometimes you'll only get them down to their knees, or maybe not even down to their knees. And that is the time, Elliot said, to grab the leg and start moving into more of a, not a guard passing thing, but it's more like a wrestling takedown with a single leg idea there. And so we drilled that a little bit, and that's just going to be another one of those takedowns in the arsenal to really improve my confidence from the standing position. And I think I've said this in a previous video, and I've heard a lot of other people say this about jiu-jitsu, which is that jiu-jitsu doesn't offer that many takedowns, and that a lot of people who are good at jiu-jitsu, the least effective part of their game is takedowns. And so I think that it's important for me in a competition, particularly that we start standing, that one of the important things is going to be that I know at least a couple of takedowns, and that I'm confident enough to try a couple of takedowns at the very least. So this is just going to be another one of those takedowns, taking advantage as well of the fact that I have quite a bit of weight behind me. So when I step to the side like that, I can pull a lot of my weight down, or I can lean on my partner on that lapel and hopefully take my partner down that way. But as you can see, after that takedown does occur, sometimes that knee shield is like kind of a response from your training partner, and something that I have to address. So Elliot explained to me that if I wrap up both of the legs and grab the ankle, then I can just walk around to the side of my opponent, and there's nothing really they can do with the legs to re-establish guard. And then I have a really nice side control position from there, which is probably my favorite position in all of jiu-jitsu. So I'll be very happy to get to side control as soon as possible in a competition situation. And once I'm in side control, like you probably know, I'll definitely go for the Americana submission. But depending on how everything's feeling, I may transition to mount first, because it feels to me that if you can get into the mounted position, particularly with all of your weight on top of your opponent, they're not really in much of a position to do anything, and they're expending a lot of energy. And Elliot explained to me that there is stalling, there is anti-stalling rules in jiu-jitsu. You can't just hold your opponent in any position and just wait forever, because you will be penalized in some positions. However, if you're mounted on top of your opponent, there are no stalling rules, he explained to me. And so I can be on top of my opponent in mount as long as I like, sapping away all of their energy if I have all of my weight on them. And that is a good position for me to maybe hang out in for a while, waiting for my opponent to start panicking and give me a submission. And so you might have just seen there, my ankle pushed Elliot's ankle back, which enabled me to pull him on top of me without using any of my strength to get to the back. And so that seems to me like one of the most effective moves that I learned in this private, was just my ability to push that ankle back and take the back, rather than having to pull my opponent's entire body on top of me. So that was a really good one to learn. And we're getting towards the end of our private now that we've drilled all of these different techniques. So we're just practicing what we've learned. And it seems to me like the back take, now that I've done this private, it's gone from being one of the least favorable positions for me to possibly one of the more favorable positions, because I know exactly what I'm going to do from the back. And it always confused me in the past how people said, being on someone's back is the best place you can be, because I never felt that way until now about being on someone's back. Because once I was on the back, I would never straighten out that lapel before going for the choke. I'd grab the lapel, pull it around my opponent's neck, and be squeezing the absolute hell out of them, and they wouldn't be tapping. I'd be thinking, well, the back is not a good position for me. I can't understand how anyone could find this to be a good position. And now, just having been shown that one minor adjustment of straightening out the lapel before I pull it down, before I pull it across my opponent's neck for the strangle, that is making all the difference. So I definitely think that if I have someone inside my guard, which felt to me like a bit of a stalemate position a lot of the time, I think now I'll have the confidence to go either into that sweep, depending on how my opponent defends the arm, but probably go to the back and really favor going to the back. Because once I'm at the back, I know that I have to defend my strangling hand. I know how to straighten out that lapel. I know how to pull my opponent on top of me. I know all of that stuff now. And so I think that in a competition situation, or even in just like a rolling, sparring situation, taking the back from the guard is going to be something I'm definitely going to shoot for and try to aim for. So yeah, that was a really, really good private, and really a privilege to be able to get a private lesson from someone who's so experienced in jiu-jitsu and has such a deep knowledge of all the different positions. So that was really good, and I actually can't wait now to do the competition, because I think that I'm going to be using probably one of those systems that I learned today, and hopefully, maybe do quite well in the competition. Who knows? So yeah, man, that was the whole private. That was the whole video. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to follow along on my journey to black belt, please make sure you subscribe and give me some comments in the comment section if you think there's anything that will help me on my journey and improve what I'm doing. But I'm hoping to get all the way to black belt, and it's looking pretty good so far. I'm doing a lot of jiu-jitsu lately, making a lot of videos, so yeah, it's been really great. And thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.